Hey everyone, welcome to the Incubator Podcast. I'm your co-host, Aaron Boyd.
And this is Sabir Saran. Today we are excited to have Marcin Wazinski from Spacelift join us. Spacelift is an emerging startup in the IaC collaboration space, if we will, at the highest level. But without, I will not do the entire entire justice myself. I would rather have Marcin lead the way here and give us a background about yourself, Marcin, as well as on Spacelift.
Sure. So thanks for having me and welcome everyone. My name is Madison Wazinski. I am the technical co-founder and chief product officer at Spacelift. My background is in data science and software engineering. My first real job was with Google, where I spent most of my time as an SRE working on storage systems and backups and restores. I spent some time at Facebook after that, and then I joined a startup that dealt with code quality, static code analysis. I spent there 2 years as a CTO, and then I moved to consulting. So essentially I was consulting for different scale-ups who wanted to get the most out of the cloud. As part of my engagements with my clients, I was working obviously on infrastructure as code, and I noticed that there was a lack of sort of multiplayer for infrastructure as code, be that Terraform or CloudFormation. There was no multiplayer mode. It was actually very difficult to build something on top of existing solutions. And so Spacelift was born as a side project of mine when I was working for clients. And then I noticed that people really picked it up and really liked the idea and asked me to implement it in other companies where they might have moved afterwards. And so I just decided to give it a go, take a stab at entrepreneurship and start a company.
Indeed.
And we thank you for that. And certainly necessity is the mother of all invention. And so just that idea of you being in the consulting space and saying, I recognize some challenges, I think is an important one, because I think the best products come out of solving some fundamentals. You started addressing something very important, which is there's almost an easy button here with respect to where you would put Spacelift. If you're polyglot today, if you have multiple IaC frameworks that you're supporting, like you said, CloudFormation, or maybe you've got Kubernetes, maybe you've got Terraform, Pulumi, et cetera, that becomes a very straightforward value proposition for Spacelift. But obviously there's so much more value in what you're bringing to market. Everything from workload management, very sophisticated policy management, policy as a first-class citizen, the flexibility. Could you, and again, I think I would do it a disservice, could you kind of walk through all of the other value prop that makes Spacelift so valuable in this space, and then we'll go from there?
Of course. A lot of boils down to my background as a consultant, frequently starting an engagement with a company who is already doing a lot in the IaC, and they've built their practices, they've built their tooling, and so the last thing you want to do is take their stuff and throw it away and say, that's from now on we're going to do things our way. So the way we're building Spacelift is we're supposed to be the most flexible tool out there. We support Docker, we support pre-processing, we support CDKs, etc. And so we allow you to basically take what you already have, what you've already built, what you've already invested in terms of IaC and your best practices, and move it to Spacelift pretty much as is. So we don't ask you to sacrifice what you already have in order to get the value. We want to start showing you the value from day one. And maybe then you start using more of our features and you'll gravitate towards a more multiplayer approach that we encourage with Spacelift. And that obviously very much derives from my experience as a consultant, where as a consultant you don't want to tell people to rewrite all of their stuff. You want to do as little as possible to get the most value out of it. So like you're basically trying to draw that cross where they can fix their thing, right? And you don't want to have them buy into any sort of ideology or framework. You want to meet them where they are and show them value where they are, and maybe keep showing that value as they progress, as they get more familiar with the platform.
Yeah, and I think that speaks heavily to that flexibility of your tooling. Like you said, you are trying not to be too opinionated. The fastest way out of a consulting engagement, to your point, is walking in and saying, "No, you got it all wrong. You got to redo." So, but I think that is one of the big value components that you're bringing to the table, is that ability to meet the customer where they are, et cetera. There's something else here that I would love to explore with you too, which is, it's this idea that, go back to Martin Fowler, who once talked about, hey, let's take some of the intelligence out of the pipeline itself, and let's push it down to the endpoints. It's the idea of dumb pipes and smart endpoints. But with IaC, that's a dangerous proposition. And so, if you could answer the question, why do we need to look at this CICD, very powerful CICD platform, with this intrinsic state management and this very robust policy management? Why do we need to introduce something like that today? And why not just use some of our existing tooling? What are some of the challenges that people are walking into as they get more and more mature?
It's a good question. So obviously the first step in that IaC journey, it would be to run things on your laptop, right? So, and you'd be very surprised to see how many large companies still do that, giving production access on personal laptops, along with AWS credentials, etc. That's actually, that's not the best practice, but it's a very common practice. So that's the first thing you do, right? Maybe even have your state checked in somewhere, or something really funny, or maybe you just pass it from a laptop to a laptop. I don't know. And then you might use a remote state on S3, and that's a step up. Talking about Terraform, obviously. And then you might try to build something on top of a general purpose CI/CD. So something like Circle CI, GitHub Actions, a very, very good products, very generic ones. They allow you to do everything, but they still leave a lot of room for specialized tooling. So to give you an analogy, previously, my previous startup dealt with code quality, and a lot of people would say, okay, well, I can run a linter inside my GitHub Actions pipeline, and that's fine, right? I'm happy with that. And some other people would say, well, yes, but you don't have that history. You don't understand where the issues were coming from. All you get is a point-in-time snapshot of your code quality. You don't know whether it's improved, whether it's declined. You don't know the history. You don't know the trends. You don't know whether people are actually fine with certain violations, etc. So there exist tools like Codacy or like Code Climate that basically give you that specialized experience for code quality. And very similar, there is room for specialized tools for everything, but infrastructure as code is a big one. Because if you think about it, there's way more at stake than a number of arguments in a function that you exceed some arbitrary threshold. But when it comes to code quality, a lot of checks are like that. What it might be at stake is the uptime of your entire company. Maybe you mess up something with DNS, and there goes your service, right? And best of luck getting it up within 4 hours because caching and all.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. The obvious other thing is being able to easily fan out to multiple environments, right? So the pipelines that you set up using something like a general purpose CI/CD, they're very good at generally deploying to a specific location. Sometimes, though, there might be thousands of locations, and those locations might be connected. So you want to deploy to one location, then to 10 other locations, and then to 100 as a full rollout. So there's a lot of smarts that if you're using something like a general purpose CI/CD, you need to build yourself. So sometimes people ask during when I give demos, hey, I could build something like that myself. And I'm like, yes, you could. I mean, we did, right? So yes, it can be done. It's just an awful lot of work if you want to do it well. And so there's room for tools like Spacelift, in my opinion.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Martin. So building on that concept here, so how do traditional organizations, enterprises that have their CI/CD pipeline are starting to or have a digital footprint, if you will, a cloud footprint, cloud native or digital native, perhaps you may go down a path here, start to embark on this journey with a Spacelift? What is the logical point of entry? How does that execute itself or start to actually overlay on top of your CI/CD?
Yeah, good question. So there might be multiple points of entry, but I think the best path that I've seen that people have been taking, the most successful path, is them realizing that a lot of their time and effort is spent on looking at other people's Terraform. So you might have that, shared infra team, a platforms team, if you will, that is basically trying to build infrastructure for everyone. And they're swamped, right? Because someone requires this, someone requires something else, someone requires a tweak here, someone requires a tweak there, and that number is growing. As they're successful, there's hundreds and hundreds of deployments, and essentially they're swamped. They might build, of course, they're programmers themselves, so they might build something bespoke, but they see the limitations. And when they see a platform like Spacelift, where you, for example, can terraform the Terraform. So basically you can declare your policies, you can declare your deployments, you can do it all through Terraform declaratively, and you can do that powerful automation where you can connect certain things to other things, make those dependency trees and have that execute in the right order. That's where they see, okay, well, that is going to save us a lot of time and effort. So now we get to build some, more domain-specific stuff. We're not going to be spending so much time on infrastructure. And it also empowers us to do things that wouldn't have been possible previously. So, for example, like dev environments, every time you push to a new branch, we might open like a completely new, what we call stack, and set up like a separate copy of infrastructure for your application. And you might have like QA clicking through it, So there's a lot of like empowerment and serendipity that follows that initial installation.
So I think what I want to do. So I want to stay on this theme for a second, but I also want to acknowledge that we probably jumped in pretty quick because I do want to give almost a little bit of a glossary. Like that was the first introduction of stacks. We should probably come back and talk about some of the corollaries and some of the kind of constructs of Spacelift. But before we do that, I want to bludgeon this one a little further. So do you find, because this is, we find people in some sort of spectrum. We either find folks that are saying, hey, we recognize we don't have time to build this on our own right now. We may want to in the future as we kind of build capabilities collectively across the org. But from a time to market, let's get started. And Spacelift is a very, very easy thing to get started with. And we'll probably come back to that as well. But we also have other customers that are doing exactly where we started on this path, which is like you were mentioning, some of the challenges of, sure, if you were using a linter, but what about all of these capabilities that aren't necessarily captured? What if I have complex workflows? Like I could use a wrapper like TerraGrunt. I could do things and I could keep adding and adding and adding. But now you've accumulated all this debt. And to the earliest point you made, things can go horribly wrong with a declarative. So before we get to some of those kind of fundamental building blocks, I was going to ask, what is Spacelift doing to protect product teams who want autonomy, but we have to be protected from potential calamity? And things could go horribly wrong, as you stated, with IaC. So what kinds of things, and you can do it out of sequence if you want. If you want to start with the building blocks, then we'll come back to this. But I think that's an important one to address also, that Spacelift can help protect folks from getting into really bad situations. Wherever you want to start with that one, Martin.
There's a couple of things we do. So first of all, starting with like a very basic principles. Like we allow you to preview what's going to change, right? We save the plan, we show you the plan, we parse it, we present it nicely, and we show you what's going to change before you even press the apply button. And so you have that moment of reflection. Hey, is that what I really wanted to do? We give that feedback on pull requests. We know exactly what's changing. So we show you that feedback on the pull request. So like things are not happening unexpectedly. We also serialize all the deployments to a particular, I'll call it stack. It's a deployment artifact, and we'll talk about it later. So we serialize those deployments so that people don't step on each other's toes. Moving a little bit towards more advanced use cases, we have the policy engine where you can declare rules on what's okay and not okay inside your organization. You can declare certain resources having certain constraints. So for example, if I create an S3 bucket, it shouldn't be open to the public. Or if I declare a security group, it shouldn't accept inbound traffic on all ports, etc. And so you can establish those ground rules for the organization. They could be like security rules, because I've been talking about security rules, but they could be cost rules. So for example, I don't want to have any single database instance cost more than $2,000 a month, or otherwise I need an approval. Or it could be workflow. So for example, like don't delete more than 5 things at the same time, because you might like create friction or confusion. There's also very sophisticated approval chains that you can have with Spacelift. So not only having an arbitrary human approve, that's obviously possible, but you can also have very sophisticated approval chains where you say for a database change that has to be approved by a DBA and a security person. And maybe for an IEM role that has to be approved by a product manager or an engineering director and a security person. So you can kind of build those pipelines that are very robust and enforced on Spacelift before your change even hits production.
Martin, that's sounds like a lot of complexity, as CI traditionally is in of itself. And in this case, we're trying to manage these configurations, manage state, the policies, all of these. So how does Spacelift uniquely enable this for an ideal, say, developer experience, or the secret sauce here with Spacelift in terms of managing this across not only a workflow, a team, or maybe even a department, what have you? What are the things that you're seeing out there, and how do you simplify it through Spacelift?
What was our secret weapon from day one was that we are like an API first company. We're using GraphQL. And so the GUI that you see is just one of the clients of our API. The other one is a CLI tool called SpaceCTL or Space Control. But the most important one by far in managing the complexity is the Terraform provider that we've built. And our Terraform provider pretty much covers everything that you can do through the GUI or through the API. And that allows you to essentially spin up new stacks, spin up new deployments, set up all that complexity declaratively, encapsulate it in modules that define how things are done in your company, how things are structured in your company, and then further automate it using Spacelift and Terraform or Pulumi itself. And that is a very, very powerful abstraction, allowing you to terraform your Terraform or Pulumi. And that, I think, has been historically our greatest value driver.
Yeah, there's going back to, you've already stated it, policy is that first-class citizen. And just with the example you gave, you can start to see how powerful Spacelift can be in an organization. But how are you, because one of the things we have to acknowledge is our policies are complex. There's learning curves, right? You're using OPA and Rego. And so there's learning curves with just authoring some of these policies. When you get to complex workflows and complex policies and dependencies, this gets exceptionally difficult. You've got to write it, you've got to test it, you've got to validate it, you've got to so on and so forth, and retest, and that takes time. What is Spacelift able to do to help kind of short circuit that? Because the complexity is the endearing part of this, but I believe you also have some implementations to help make that effective and easier for folks to embrace. Can you walk through a little bit of how teams can practically leverage some of that complexity?
So we do realize that Rego and OPA in general are not easy. And I wouldn't say it's a problem we've solved. I think it's a challenge in terms of adoption, and we are trying to address that challenge. We're doing certain things to address that. We will do other things to address that even further. But I don't think we have a perfect story yet for embracing policy and handling that complexity. We do offer a policy library, so all of the kind of common workflows, common patterns as ready to implement templates. We also give examples, very, very thorough examples when you're authoring policies. So that's definitely something that we're doing to make it more approachable. We've seen other companies who are adopting OPA or are driving OPA, for example, Styra, building a more approachable GUI. They called it Policy Builder, Styra DAS Policy Builder. And we might end up building something similar, maybe even simpler, to allow people to basically click on rules and do like almost like visual programming that will eventually transform into Rego. It's one of the things that we've been thinking about. But I hear you. Like, policies are complex. Yes.
But I also love that. Well, I guess to further support what we're talking about with this is I don't know that we have a single customer that isn't using OPA in some capacity now. But only a couple years ago, it was only a handful of folks, and so at least there's that kind of rising tide discussion. Everybody's starting to get a little more aware and embrace. So that's interesting. So one of the other, I guess, areas that I would love to have you talk about is this idea of drift. IaC drift is effectively unavoidable. There's things that are, from an SRE perspective, I'm sure like this was your world for a portion. Drift is inevitable as part of just troubleshooting and reacting to, and then there's drift that inherently happens in an organization as well. How does Spacelift help with drift management and maybe correction, et cetera? What are you doing in that space? Because I think that's interesting.
Yeah, so very good question. And I think I will address, there are actually two types of drift that are worth talking about maybe at some point. So there's the bad drift and there's good drift. So it's not only a challenge, but it's also an opportunity. So I'd like to talk about both actually. But let's start with bad drift. Bad drift is when the world doesn't look the way we wanted it to look like. So let's say a database parameter group is changed and it's no longer reflective of what we set up through Terraform. What Spacelift does to allow you to detect that and optionally to fix that is something called drift detection. And it's not really like rocket science, it's not magic. You set up like a cron expression or multiple cron expressions, and we run, if you're in Terraform work, we run Terraform plan to check whether the resources that you're managing through Spacelift are still the same as you left them. And so if they aren't, we can either give you a shout and be done with that, but you can also spin up a job with an intention to fix it. And now that job doesn't have to do it automatically. It can just stop short of applying the change and say, hey, I'm here. If you want to fix this, that's what drifted. Are we good? Or maybe we're not. Maybe it's exactly what you wanted because an SRE was fixing a database on Friday night and they changed something to improve it. And you definitely don't want to change that back on Sunday morning because you're going to have a really bad page on Sunday afternoon, for example. And so like drift happens, it's unavoidable, but sometimes knowing about drift is always good. Sometimes fixing drift is actually not what you want, right? So we allow you to decide on what is the fixable drift, what is the reviewable drift, and what is the drift that you basically say, okay, acknowledge, I'm going to live with that. And so that's the good drift. Sorry, that's the bad drift. There's also good drift. So to give you an example, we accept webhooks coming from different Git providers. One of them is Bitbucket, and Bitbucket publishes the list of IPs that are like their IPs, so that we need to, like, they're saying, okay, if the webhook is coming from one of these IPs, we should trust that webhook or that payload. The problem is that, of course, that list is embedded in our application, but that list changes, right? And so every time they change their IP range, we need to update our application. Or we have a load balancer that only accepts traffic from CloudFront, and CloudFront also has IP ranges, and we want to be mindful of that. And every time IP ranges for CloudFront would change, we want to change our load balancer config to cover that. And this is the good drift, because it allows you to react to outside world changes very, very dynamically. And you can go even more dynamic than that. So one thing that we've seen our customer doing with the good drift is they subscribed a stack to GitHub repository. Every time someone would open a pull request with a particular label that said QA, they would set up what we call a stack, and they would launch a separate instance of their application using Spacelift, using Terraform, for the QA to click on it. And that's drift as well. But what you're seeing is that data source, that list of GitHub PRs, pull requests with a particular label. That's a wonderful example of good drift, because you want to be able to respond to outside world events quickly. Since Terraform is basically not self-contained, it's not pure, it always depends, maybe not always, but it frequently depends on outside inputs, or maybe the newest AMI for our application or for your service, that sort of stuff. I would call it good drift.
Yeah. Thanks, Martin. Maybe we could shift to, what is the ideal client for Spacelift look like, or where have you found the most success in terms of your existing client base? Where is Spacelift heading, and how should customers or potential clients look at Spacelift?
So we are generally finding the most success with what you might call digital natives. So companies that either started in the cloud or have migrated and embraced cloud. And they are using APIs heavily to automate the provisioning of cloud resources, be that something like AWS, but also maybe building Datadog dashboards, that sort of stuff, right? I think there is a certain inflection point where it makes sense for them to adopt Spacelift, and this is generally when something emerges that resembles like a platform team, like a shared resource for different product or experience teams that focuses primarily on keeping the lights on, in a sense, and doing all of the plumbing, doing all the maintenance work on things that devs don't necessarily need to touch on a daily basis, but they still need to be aware of, and they still need to be able to get resources whenever they want. And so when that central team realizes that they are spending way too much time building, reviewing other people's code, building bespoke tooling, fixing problems with someone's Terraform installation, that is when they would turn to something like Spacelift to essentially work as a force multiplier for the organization.
So I think you can handle, so you just said it there, it really doesn't matter the entry point. You can work with kind of centralized a team-centric approach with kind of the traditional platform engineering, kind of building rules of engagement, policies, et cetera, and pushing that out. You can work with service-centric teams that are trying to build some of the composable or maybe different artifacts that could be reused across different teams. Or I imagine you can just like, hey, we sold it to some product teams to start. It doesn't have to be company-wide. Maybe it's a bit of a land and expand, and they have full autonomy. I don't know if there's a kind of a natural progression through that you see. If it's a big bang and platform engineering says like I need to solve this problem because I'm always getting called about X, or it happens in a different kind of form. Is there any emerging pattern on how people are starting and consuming and growing their Spacelift footprint?
We're definitely seeing expansions all the time. Like every time there's like a contract renewal, we see people getting more and more. So there's definitely usage increase, both in terms of sheer volume and the scope that Spacelift covers. So basically not only having more people using Spacelift, but also doing more things with Spacelift. We see Spacelift being adopted by sometimes one team in the organization, and then other teams would pick it up, and then eventually you would sign like an umbrella contract for the whole company. We would also see interesting patterns where a smaller company would embrace Spacelift, be acquired, and the acquiring company, they do like a due diligence, and they go like, oh, what's that? And that's actually cool. We need to have it in here as well. So we've seen that pattern as well, like people realizing the value upon looking at it and going, hey, I want that. I need that.
Yeah, from a support perspective, I mentioned a few like Kubernetes, Terraform, Pulumi, CloudFormation. Am I missing? Is that, I mean, that's broad, and boy, that covers, I'm going to say, most of our customers. Some folks are using other, transpilers, et cetera, but that's a huge swath of our install base. Any developments that you're working on that are worth noting to folks as well in that space?
We're actually finalizing our first iteration of Ansible support.
Okay, that'll be huge. Yeah, we like that.
Yeah. And Marcin, where do people typically start with Spacelift? I mean, I understand you have like a free version, Cloud Enterprise, or if you can elaborate, what's the point of entry from consuming Spacelift?
We generally, the pattern is that people install it in their private GitHub accounts. So when you install our application, we automatically provision you a Spacelift instance, and you get 14 days on like all you can eat enterprise trial. We reach out to you to see how you're doing. If we need to extend the trial because you're doing some POC work, absolutely, we are open to that wherever it makes sense. So I would suggest that if you just want to get your hands dirty with Spacelift, get a private account, start playing with it, see what you can do with that. And when you're ready to build maybe like a feasibility study or a proof of concept for the organization, then you can open another account, this time in the name of the organization that you're working for, and build something like for real.
And I think realistically, we're talking 10, 15 minutes and you can be up and running.
Absolutely.
Like
Absolutely.
Really easy to inject. And I think that's where I was going to close on. It's not lost on us what time it is for you. But that's where I wanted to close on, which is how can people engage? But it's very easy to sign up. It's spacelift.io, very quick to integrate, and you'll find that you're up and running in short order. Of course, Sabir and I are happy to talk to anybody about this space as well. So if anybody wants to, please reach out to us. But Marcin, thank you so much for this vignette on Spacelift. We're really, really excited about this space. We're going to keep watching until Ansible comes out because we've got some folks that I think would immediately want to take a look at that. But huge congratulations to you, and thank you for being a consultant and finding this pain in the first place.
Thanks, guys, for having me.
Thank you, Marcin.
Thank
Good
you.
evening.
Bye-bye.
Bye.